Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. And on behalf of GPPAC, the Global Partnership for Prevention of Armed Conflict, I'd like you to feel very welcome at this Improving Practice Working Group online training on multi-stakeholder processes for human security, which we also decided we would rename as online training on setting the table for peace, to make it a little bit clearer what it means. GPPAC, founded in 2003, but actually launched in New York in 2005 at the United Nations with over 1,000 civil society organizations, is a member-led network of civil society organizations working on conflict prevention and peace building across the world, focusing very much on a human security lens towards these two, both the prevention and the peace building. The mission is to promote a global shift in peace building in how armed conflict is dealt with, a shift from reaction to prevention, again, through the lens of human security and what this implies, which our speaker will come to later. It's a truly global organization. This was agreed at the launch in the UN in 2005. So it was decided then to have 15 different regions of the network. You can see it doesn't quite match the colors there, but Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, different regions of Africa. I'm based in East Jerusalem in the MENA region. So we have a Middle East, North Africa partnership for prevention of armed conflict. And all these regions are in touch with each other and collaborating through the Secretariat of GPPAC and directly with each other. It's an extremely dynamic and productive network. In addition to the regions, we have working groups, peace education, policy and advocacy. And this webinar is organized by our Improving Practice Working Group, which aims to improve the way conflict prevention and peace building is done in practice, based on human security and a multi-stakeholder approach. This workshop includes both. This is actually, I think it's our third online training, not the second, I'm not sure. But anyway.
Yeah, it's third.
I think it's our third. We did one on human security and one on conflict analysis. All at the moment related to the ongoing pandemic situation and the uncertainty around us. But anyway, so we are getting better at these. And this is the second day. Here's a picture of our group in the good old days when we could meet together. This is in Vienna. And our speaker, John Rudy, is at the back under the blue umbrella, and Tanya, who will be presenting a case study about Serbia. So with the red hair and the yellow shirt and the red scarf, very colorful. So, and you can see we have people from everywhere. It was a good meeting with, actually organized by Patriot, who we have someone from today in our participants. Welcome. Today, John Rudy, who you can see also on the side of your screen. He is a global educator on the topics of human security, peace building, conflict transformation, and nonviolence, with more than 35 years of work in 30 countries in Asia and Africa. He has focused his efforts at transforming conflict at community and middle-out leadership. His recent training energies have gone towards human security and civil society. He will, just to let you know, be teaching shortly a 5-week course, meeting twice a week, on peace education in conjunction with the Mindanao Peace Building Institute, where he has worked for many years as a facilitator. So John will be giving a recap about yesterday and introducing how best to facilitate at multi-stakeholder processes. We will also then have a case study by Tanya, and maybe I'll introduce Tanya now as well. Is that okay, John?
Yeah.
Just to finish the introductions. Tatiana Popovic holds an MA in Peace Studies from the Faculty of Political Sciences at the University of Belgrade. She's a certified mediator. She's director of Nansen Dialogue Center, Serbia, and an experienced trainer within the conflict transformation field. She has facilitated over the last 18 years a number of interethnic dialogue seminars for teachers, Ministry of Education advisors, and local authorities representatives in the Western Balkans, and contributed to cross-border cooperation and reconciliation. Tanya is also the author of several practice books on dialogue and education for peace. So welcome both John and Tanya. Please put your questions in the chat box, and then we will make sure to get to them at the end and have some discussion. Welcome again. Please, John, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. And I just need to get my participants and my chat window up. Okay. Well, good. Welcome back to those of you who are joining us for the second day. And for those of you who are new, I hope this is very interesting. Want to point out a resource that GPPAC makes freely available. This is the Multi-Stakeholder Processes for Community Prevention and Peace Building Manual. And the QR code is there if you want to flash that, or the link. And we can put that link in the chat box if you're interested in this manual. Today is the second day. Yesterday we looked at designing a multi-stakeholder process, and I'll shorten that now, MSP. And today we're going to look at facilitating an MSP. Tomorrow I have breakout groups, but we'll probably do a little bit more input. This is a vast topic and there's lots more to cover. We've just confirmed a case study from Fiji for tomorrow, which will be very fascinating. They have an interesting dialogue going there between government and civil society. Today we're going to look at who should be in an MSP, how to structure it. We're going to look at power dynamics again. Yesterday we touched on power briefly. This is a critical topic, so we're going to circle back around and look at another aspect of power in an MSP today. We're going to look at group stages and facilitation skills that are needed during various phases of an MSP in operation. We're going to look at a case study from Tanya, as was mentioned by Lucy already, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Well, why do we do MSPs? So I want to show you a diagram that came out of, this is from the DCAF International Security Sector Advisory Team. It's called Security Sector in a Nutshell. But I find this a fascinating diagram of that comes out of Kenya, based around the HIV/AIDS work that was done there a decade ago. You can see all the stakeholders. Somebody in their infinite wisdom drew this organogram or this diagram about who all was involved in that particular issue at that particular time in that particular country. And you can see that, of course, coordination is an issue. If each one of these little blocks was doing its own thing, can you imagine the chaos? And there probably was chaos anyways. But the need for coordination and wading through the complexity of issues that we have based around some of the conflicts with which we're trying to pull these multi-stakeholder processes together, you can see definitely there is a need for coordination. Just to recap the very simple definition of human security, because again, this is an organizing principle which we're bringing to this idea of multi-stakeholder processes. We're trying to coordinate for human-centered security. And the UN definition of that, freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom to live a life with dignity. So we're approaching this addressing one or more of these freedoms, one or more of these needs that we have as human beings in communities under stress and conflict. Or if you want, during this time of pandemic, these three pillars are extremely important. Yesterday, we looked at designing an MSP, and again, briefly to recap here, asking ourselves, so why are we organizing? What are we organizing around? Is it a problem? Is it a conflict? Or is it an opportunity? And obviously the world isn't that simple. It's some of all of those. But this will help us to kind of organize and think about our approach to an MSP. And thinking about the resources that we have that we bring to that, each sector bringing that, and thinking about the gaps. So if we're pulling people together for a multi-stakeholder process, who needs to be there based on what gaps there are in the whole process and in the whole addressing the issue. And then finally, we looked at kind of the adaptive planning cycle, I should say the planning cycle, the adaptive, the collaboration, the reflective monitoring. So we covered that. So for today, I want to ask the question, first of all, who? Now take a look at this picture and just think for a moment, what sectors might be present in this picture? Think about them. If you want to add some to the chat window, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but always ask yourself the question, who? In a multi-stakeholder process, who's going to be there? Now, in this particular picture, perhaps you will identify indigenous people contrasted to the foreigners in the room. This is in Somaliland, so guess who the foreigners are? Guess who the indigenous are? We can see men and we can see women. And thank you, Rex. It does depend on the issues being addressed as to who's in the table. In this picture, we can see men and women. We can see maybe religious, and we can see maybe secular. We can see the media in the room. So this question of who needs to be faced strategically. John Paul Lederach coined this phrase, the strategic who. Think about those people who are leaders, who can exert influence, who maybe are bringing the gaps in the sectoral kind of conversations we need to have in an MSP. Think about a diversity of perspectives. If we have only one perspective in the room where everybody thinks alike, we are not going to get to decisions, yet alone programs, that are going to address the breadth of the conflict that we are facing. And then think about identity. Someone raised in the conversation yesterday the idea of identity. I think it was Mark in his case study, talked about identity. This is critical because this is also the various perspectives, but it also may, in terms of identity, it also may give us clues as to who's excluded, who needs to be included. And then yesterday we looked a little bit about the legitimacy. If you have only one group of perspectives in the room, will it have legitimacy in those with different perspectives? And so asking the who question also gives some clues into how legitimate this process you bring together will be. Again, we're thinking about how now. Take a look at these two pictures and name the different ways you see these MSPs set up. Just take a moment to think about the setup here. Some of the first ones that are evident are a round table versus a square table. That makes a huge difference in how people feel welcomed, in how they feel their voice might be heard. We see that in the square or the rectangular table, we see that there's a definite head of the table, whereas in a round table, it's not so clear as to who's in charge, right? We can think about formality versus informality, and we can think about free-flowing structures. And on the left picture there, it's organized around a meal. And so conversation will tend to be much more free-flowing. In the right picture, we have a laptop. So we know that there's some kind of an agenda and some kind of a presentation by the person at the head of the table. And so it must be more structured of an input. So when we think about how free-flowing versus structured, the table shape, the hierarchy, because when we look at the next slide and we think about power, definitely the person at the head of a table represents more power, more influence over the whole process. Formality. The venue, where is this thing held? Is it a formal hall or is it a restaurant? And then there are some, the other issues of how we do the MSP that we need to think about. Take a look at this picture. Oh, I didn't put one on here. This is our Peace General Ferrer this was in Cotabato in the Philippines, Mindanao, Philippines. Think about look at this picture and find the expressions of power that you can see represented in this picture. And again, take a moment to think about that. We can see a banner on the wall. We can see a person in uniform. We see gender position represented here. Again, if we have the head of the table, where is the one woman in the room? Way in the back corner, right? And the focus that people give in this picture, who are they focusing on? So how power is expressed. Notice the man in the front left picture. He's got his arms crossed. This is even an expression of power. This is an expression of personal power. I am blocking you off. This body language signifies I'm a little bit defensive here. And so I'm expressing maybe in a situation where I feel powerless. That is my modality of expression. So in designing our process and then facilitating it, we have to be very aware as facilitators, what expressions of power do we permit and do we prohibit? And again, this idea of uniforms in the room, conveying power, understand the power imbalances that are implied there. Again, we're asking, where do we meet? Who's at the head of the table? If you are the facilitator of this process, how do you assert that authority to be the facilitator, the convener of a multi-stakeholder process? This is an important thing to think through, because if you are the convener, you have been vested with a certain amount of power, and don't deny that power, but utilize it for greater group cohesiveness, for the mission of the group, for the purpose of the group. Where do people sit? Do you put people from one group or one sector all at one side of the table, or do you mix them up? Are you intentional and strategic about that? And that last one there, what's the time of the day, the time of the week? If you are inviting grassroots to your multi-stakeholder process and you have it in the middle of the day, those folks may be in their fields, in their gardens. Those folks may have to be taking care of their children. And whereas professionals who come out of a professional sector, well, it's their job to be at this multi-stakeholder process. And in the middle of the day is convenient for them. So think about the convenience in the time of day and the day of the week that may set up, that may convey some kind of a power and may be excluding or including. So think about that. I'm going through this pretty quickly here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat window, and we can pick and we can circle back around to those when we get to our Q&A. I'm actually looking at the chat as well and can maybe address some of those immediately. Now, this topic today is on facilitating the MSP, and many groups go through a transition to becoming a really cohesive, functioning body. So I want to walk us through today what kinds of facilitation skills may be needed at various stages of group formation and group kind of efficacy. So think about some that I may not be including here, and again, I welcome you to reflect on these as Tanya shares her case study. The first one is groups need to connect. So if you are part of the visionary of bringing a multi-stakeholder process together, and you're trying to get the group together, connections are incredibly important. So thinking about being a catalyst, thinking about being a shuttle diplomat, because maybe you have one group that has to be at this multi-stakeholder process, otherwise decisions won't be complete enough. And yet they have some hesitancy. How are you going to get them there? You need to be a shuttle diplomat. You need to be an optimist, right? You need to express optimism about what the group can accomplish if everybody works together. And part of that then is being a visionary, setting out the end goal. Look, folks, if we could collaborate on all of this, here's what could happen. And so you have to be able to spin that vision so that you gain people's buy-in. You have to be a good listener as well. What are the hesitancies? What are the sticking points? Where might someone be causing problems for the group in the future, and how do you address that? And certainly you need to develop the credibility and the trust. You need to be trustworthy, and whether that's in holding things in confidence or whatever. These are some of the things. So think about what other skills might be needed in this connecting of the group. The group then, once it begins to form and meet together, has to develop a shared language. I don't have time today, but in the Human Security Handbook that GPPAC, again, makes freely available, and again, we could put that link in the chat, Christina, if you can find that link. There's a section in there about language. We don't all come with the same understanding. Civil society looks at stakeholders, whereas the military may look at things as, these people are the enemy, or they're the terrorists. Well, we have to develop a shared language to talk about the people who are spoiling a peace process, or the people who are perpetrating violence. And so the developing of the shared language, the facilitator needs to be a conductor, right? Bringing out the voices as they need to be. It needs to keep the group focused. It's easy to get derailed at this point in shared language based around the differences that people are discovering. You need to be well organized at this point. And again, understand how to pick apart this need for the cohesiveness in the group, and focusing on what your gains can be in the group. You need to be collaborative, and you certainly need to understand the power dynamics and differentials at this stage. Looking at then groups come together and they face a sticky problem like developing a shared language. Things tend to fly apart, and this is where the group that has come together, and maybe it's your first meeting, maybe it's your second or third, but as you start to delve into the issues that divide you, the divergences become clear. And so it's at this stage that you need to have conflict management capacity. a facilitator needs to be able to stick with the energy in the room. If it's hostile or intense energy, there's a lot of feelings being expressed. The facilitator needs to be able to manage that energy. And perhaps the facilitator needs to say, hey, let's take a break now. Let's cool off a little bit. You need to be that unanxious presence in the room. You need to be non-judgmental or non-partisan. You need to have persistence. You need to have the ability to articulate the differences and be able to flip that into the things that are common and are similar. Pointing out the common ground that the groups have together, because really when the conflicts in intergroup conflicts heat up a little bit, it's so easy for the conflicting parties just to see differences and then to start lobbing accusations at each other. And then you need to encourage the silent ones to speak. There's a lot of wisdom around the table that may be holding out. This is where you need to balance the power as a facilitator and bring out the silent voices and encourage them to speak into these points of divergence. And again, you got to have the vision here to stick with this process, because this is where things fly apart. But get through that, and then you get to the co-creation stage. This is basic mediation as well. If it's one person mediating two people in parties, or if it's group dynamics, many of these things are very similar. In terms of co-creation then, there's a point at which the divergence, if you stick with it and you're the facilitator, you can flip that into co-creation, and people begin to buy into the vision and the future, and then they begin to spin what's possible and spin new ideas that may not have been evident. So again, you're the coach. You have imagination to pull things out of people that they may be on the very cusp of saying. The capability to hold various views and threads, not letting any one position drop, but also making sure that that's woven into this co-creating things. Because this is a point where groups begin to be runaway, right? They run away with one idea. And as a facilitator, it could be that some of the quieter voices get railroaded off, right? To use that analogy. And so you need to be able to bring in those quiet voices back into the discussion as things are coming together. Keep to the process and manage the everything that's come out in the group in terms of documentation. If you are the facilitator and you're using this big white butcher paper and you're writing notes furiously, the ability to kind of synthesize those ideas. And then this co-creation leads to a convergence. It seems to be that groups come together and there's a consensus that emerges. And again, you have to make sure that those quiet voices, those marginal ideas are fully appreciated, and if everyone agrees, then set aside if that's not the main agenda. So knowing when to shift toward an operational posture is an important one here. To be a documenter, and again, some of these run the whole thread of the group, but they are highlighted during these stages of convergence. Providing feedbacks, observations, summary. To this point, you may have been managing the process, but now you can offer your observations about the energy shifts, about, where people are headed, about the enthusiasm, and just to reinforce kind of the convergence around ideas. You need to be able to summarize, right? Because there may be 1,000 different ideas, but they may all gel into one main idea. And the ability to clarify. Your communication skills here are critical, certainly all through the process and needed here in convergence. And then finally, groups come together in a commitment, right? Now, how do you manage this commitment? It's one thing to be in an hour or 2 or 3 long session where everybody has energy. How do you keep that momentum up And so that commitment, gaining the commitment and the way forward is the part, this part of this stage of the group. So finding creative ways in presenting the options of moving forward. The diplomacy in drafting agreements. It's one thing for people to buy in mentally. It's another thing for people to buy in by putting their signature or, you know, being included in some kind of an agreement, because that's a little bit more structuralized then, and then people's enthusiasm gets tempered by reality and the way forward. Drafting agreements, again, and ensuring feedback, right? And again, when's the next meeting? What's the next steps in making sure that's clarified and that there's ownership taking in the way forward. So I suggest that in terms of facilitating an MSP, these are some broad ideas and skills that are needed. One more thing I want to do here is to talk about, again, this is another way to look at how MSPs come together and in formation. First of all, you may have people in the groups who are competing with each other. And again, this deals with power. Ultimately, you want to get them past coexistence, which is just putting up with each other. You want to get to the coordination and the cooperative stages. You want this MSP group to think of themselves as integrated, as one body. When they do so, then maybe they will yield themselves to one command or one authority. And maybe another way to think of this is to speak with one voice, right? We speak unified on this policy decision or on this law or on this injustice that we see in our community. You want people to function as that cohesive group addressing the purpose for which they've set out to make a difference in. So this is another way to see how these groups come together. Lastly, before we get to Tanya here, I just want to mention that continuing and ongoing assessment is critical in an MSP, because often we're dealing with a very dynamic and fluid context. We're in that context. The conflict is ever changing and shifting. The injustice that we are trying to address keeps morphing and changing into other things and impacting other areas. And so the need for assessment is critical. Understanding the limitations of your group is a critical part of this assessment as well. No one group can do everything. So you may have multiple groups coordinating with each other. This is the beauty of Mark's case study yesterday in the Philippine context with the Mindanao Peace Weavers. What a beautiful example of groups that needed to learn to coordinate with each other and move and continue in a very dynamic context. And you know, you have to be honest about what you don't know in the group. You have to be honest about your blind spots. This assessment should be built in early on, but perhaps it's not going to be as useful until the group forms some kind of an identity and has some kind of cohesiveness that they can function as a group. Then you can ask the questions: what you know, what you know that you don't know, what you do not know that you know, and what you do not know that you do not know. I find these are very 4 questions that are quite fascinating. So I think with that, Tanya, we're welcome hearing your case study.
Okay, thank you very much, John. You don't want to take some questions now? No,
No, I think we'll hear your case study, and hopefully people can reflect on your case study vis-a-vis the input, and then we'll have some time for Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Then I will share my screen. So as John announced, I will talk about different facilitation styles that we have been using actually I will present the case study of South Serbia and dialogue process there, multi-ethnic dialogue process or multi-stakeholder dialogue process, but for us it was important that it was multi-ethnic process as well. So we are Nuns and Dialogue Center Serbia, and we have been working in the region of Western Balkans, but specifically mostly in Serbia, actually, across the border, as well as Lucy mentioned in the beginning. So I thought that two clearer objectives for my today's presentation to present these different facilitation styles. One is how we facilitated political representatives, actually local self-government representatives, in order to improve their cooperation, and educational sector, because we worked with many schools also in that part of Serbia. So being at once teacher, always a teacher, I like to clarify some the terminology and how we define dialogue facilitator, because that took us some time actually to do that in our own region, because terminology was confusing back in the 90s, late 90s and beginning of 2000 when we started working after the conflicts. This peace terminology could be confusing for people working on the ground. So they are used to directors, to teachers, but not to facilitators or mediators. So it took us some time to explain that. Most of you know, I believe, that facilitare comes from, it is Latin word to ease the process. So facilitator is in its essence actually the teacher in most traditional way and in the beautiful way, actually. Because we connected with the dialogue facilitator as neutral, skillful, or skilled patient individual who leads a dialogue process among a group of people or between groups of people. So that's, I'm immediately making 2 points that we did within the groups and between the groups who are in conflict or have opposing positions on certain issues important for functioning of the community. So facilitators are there to improve this cooperation and to help people solve their own problems. So I think that, yeah, I should put this view, actually, I forgot this. And also briefly, because that's what I did, at least with many participants of our dialogue trainings, that to explain that dialogue in our society, dialogue is observed as political dialogue, which could be actually highly heated debate and not the real peace dialogue, as we call it, or a democratic dialogue, whatever terminology you want to use it. I prefer peace dialogue, which is process of genuine interaction with ups and downs, we will see later, through which human beings listen to each other deeply enough to change by what they learn. But it doesn't mean that they have to change. That also took us some time to explain. Because in the beginning, since we worked in a post-conflict situation, people were afraid that they were accused by their own ethnic group, actually, that they work with the others, they are traitors and so on. So that's why I like this explanation. I don't like to call it definition, that no participant gives up her or his identity, but each recognizes enough of the other's valid human claims that he or she will act differently toward the other. So that was our primary goal in the beginning, to connect human faces again, to actually, we often repeated that phrase that enemy images stop being enemy images, and that we bring back that human face to neighbors and to people who work together. And the identity as an important component, as John mentioned it, in each community, and how it is being shown to the other side. So what is our approach, like Nuns and Dialogue Center? work on rebuilding relationships and re-establishing cooperation after the conflict, offering the safe space and creating it together with people, and facilitating establishment of context or re-establishing, it depends. And all these processes take time, and we were present in Southern Serbia for 6 years and worked parallelly on these two programs, and sometimes jointly with decision makers and education sector. So you can see that our participants were teachers, students, local authorities, representatives, media, state institutions, NGOs, and so on. And we ourselves were change agents, but we also try to motivate people to become or change agents, or to become aware of their potentials to be change agents in their own community, so that it is not only some people who come from, I don't know, from Belgrade or from abroad who come to solve their own problems. A little bit of context. So this is the map of Western Balkans, and you can see Serbia with capital Belgrade, and then Kosovo. And this area where we worked is around here, in between Macedonia and bordering with Kosovo. Actually, it's very, very close. So just to put you in the, so these are nowadays independent countries, and all this used to be ex-Yugoslavia actually. And what was the state of affairs in 2003 is that we had the conflict that was ended already. There were still some occasional incidents in the bordering area that I showed to you with Kosovo and Macedonia. But local community in Bujanovec municipality was completely divided. As you can see that local self-government is under the Serbian state system, and that is part of Serbia actually, so that's why it is like that. But they couldn't agree on how to have joint multi-ethnic self-government, which they were obliged by law. So we approached them and tried to do something around that. There was one more institution, that state created immediately after the conflict, and that is Coordination Body for South Serbia. These are basically several people who immediately after a conflict really did a good job of connecting people and visiting villages and talking to everyone and so on. But at later stage, they became only like a political institution with not so much influence any longer, even when we came there. So schools, as I said, were separated, and languages are different, but still they could have worked in the same building, but that was not the case. And what is also important for this presentation, that political parties are ethnically based, and they still are today. So in order to make it clearer to you, there is a nice map which I actually got with the help of my colleague John, that we have Albanian representatives within the local self-government, and actually several Albanian political parties, and also Serbian political parties, the same. And there was no cooperation between them. Actually, it was open conflict and fight within this assembly. What else? Here is Nansen Dialogue Center that we tried to reconnect. We had established through separate talks, actually, excellent cooperation, and gained trust from both of these parties that you can see. However, we also had to take into consideration that Albanian political parties were highly influenced by political parties and actually institutions, both in Kosovo and in Albania. More often they were consulting with those representatives in Pristina in Kosovo. It was significant because we noticed that before any important decision that it had to be made, even in connection to our project or to development projects that were ongoing in that part of Serbia, they had to consult first. And then with the Serbian political representatives, it was significant that they had to consult with Belgrade and the headquarters. with political parties headquarters, but also with the Serbian government. They wouldn't also make any important decision. They wouldn't make a move before they do that. So as we can see, we didn't have actually only these two sides were not completely independent. That's why situation was even more complex. So they were actually local representatives that were highly dependent on headquarters in different towns and in different states, which complicated the matter. We had then the Roma population with some educated Roma that wanted to create political party. At the moment, they didn't have it when we started working. Therefore, Nansen Dialogue Center started organizing capacity building specifically, like separate line, only for Roma population, and they were excellent, I have to say. One of the best students I ever had during these capacity building trainings. They wanted to learn simply. Then eventually we realized that they had better cooperation with Serbian political parties than with Albanian representatives or local community, because Serbian political parties were encouraging them to organize their own political parties. Albanian representatives were saying that publicly, but they didn't do much to support them in these efforts actually. So that was the problem. So that's why there was no clear cooperation between them. And you can see that the main problem that we had was non-functional local government, and we as Nansen Dialogue Center wanted to improve that. Who are we? I mentioned myself only, but we had Albanian representatives also working here. My colleague Ljunka, who was a teacher, but also two men who represented the local population there. One of them was working for OIC previously, but then continued working within Nansen. And that combination of Serbian and Albanian representatives, yes, two more Serbian representatives from local community also. So that combination helped us to gain trust of all these actors. I will show you on the different slide. So that's why here I put that Serbs and Albanians were in the teams at locals. We also had support from Norwegians, which was like third neutral party. And we did these initial talks sometimes with Norwegians, but more often we were visiting each political party representatives. We were going also to villages, to unofficial like elders, and talking to them and inviting them to come to the process. So these were like individual meetings, what we call in theory intra-group work, or we had dialogue meetings separately with like almost each representative of known political representatives in South Serbia. Meetings with school principals were happening also almost at the same time, because we had that educational line that was working, and the Ministry of Education that was based in Belgrade, but we were informing them all the time what has been happening, and we had their support in the letter of minister and accreditation of programs and so on. So I'm mentioning this because for me, all this is facilitation of the dialogue. It is not only when you bring all these parties together at the table, wherever the table is and whichever issue we are discussing. So these preparatory meetings were also dialogue meetings in the essence, and as we were introducing dialogue values in combined teams and trying to explain to people why we want to help them to live together again, actually, because this is a very small community. So eventually we gained, after several months, we gained consent from all actors that we can start with our programs, and intergroup work started, and that means dialogue seminars and trainings on school mediation for schools representatives, but we also had a separate program for political parties representatives. In between, we had social events, and I would also stress them. They were like added value to everything that we did, because we connected people completely unofficially. So we organized hiking in the woods, climbing climbing the nearby hill, visiting museums, having parties almost after each seminar. Each of our capacity building seminars was away from the town itself. That is important to mention, to take them out of their context. So you can see that our approach was to gradually re-establish these contexts. That's why we call it step-by-step reconciliation. And we were not talking about the past immediately. We had professional trainings with themes that were important for politicians, as you can see here: communication, dialogue, conflict analysis, negotiation skills, but also on-job education. That small groups, some groups were lucky enough to visit Norwegian institutions and see what kind of organization, municipality and local government has got there, what kind of methodology schools use, and so on. So, and our educational program had peaceful conflict resolution and school mediation, new methodology, new teaching methodologies, how to organize work of school in modern way, and so on. Important to mention, each group was ethnically mixed, so during all these trainings and capacity building workshops. So I think that on the way we had challenges. Not everything went smoothly. Sometimes we had to talk again separately with political representatives in order to change the programs, to see what would work out better, and so on. And we did that always in coordination with our local Albanian and Serbian colleagues, as I mentioned. I think that this drawing explains it well, so not to use too much time. That we, after we decided to work on this process, we have been checking during all these during each year actually, and adjusting the programs even when they were going on already, and especially for the coming year, making changes in activities and objectives and so on, all in order to make them fit to the local context and to the reality, because the reality was changing. Life is going on no matter what we did. So this is summing up of our approach, like providing safe space. That was extremely important in the beginning, because they wouldn't come to dialogue sessions if they were public. Building trust through these separate meetings that I mentioned. Then after some time, we started using media for promotion and raising awareness. I mentioned thematic priorities. And with this long-term presence, and actually continuous presence, it is not only long-term, but in between seminars, we would have meetings in the municipality and inform authorities what is going on in the education sector. Then we would have joint work meeting between local authorities and the education sector with the principals of schools, and exchange would happen there. We organized a joint evaluation with our Norwegian colleagues, that one Norwegian and one coordinator from Nansen was seated in each working group, and groups were ethnically mixed actually from all sectors that I was mentioning, education and political party representatives. And that's how the whole project was evaluated, with simple questions. And to come to the point, actually, because I think that by giving example, I also explained facilitation style, because I was talking what kind of methodologies we were using. Here with 2 slides, I will just stress, just to check on time, I hope that that facilitation styles had to be different for local state, for local self-government, because in the beginning we had really official meetings with respecting the protocols that are important to them still. Then gradually we started organizing dialogue meetings and showing them what are the dialogue skills and how to use them in their daily work. And I would give example of the very first meeting of dialogue session that happened between Serbian and Albanian, and there were, I think, 2 or 3 Roma representatives, that we were not even sure would they come to the meeting. It was far away. They had to drive like almost 3 hours from their town. And then in the morning we organized training, and our this seminar was facilitated by international trainers, and we were facilitators and we were like assistants. Each group was given a task to define 10 questions for the colleagues, for the other so-called other side. And they were asking one question at a time, while the other side would respond. That first day was extremely difficult because they were debating, quarreling, accusations were coming. They were angry with each other. Most of them actually were also angry with the international community and the way some representatives of it addressed conflicts in the Balkans. Roma were angry because they were not recognized and so on. So it took us a lot of patience, as John said, and different types of skills, I have to say, because when I say authority, I don't mean strict authority like, I don't know, in the sense of not authoritarian style authority, but we have to stress who is organizing, who is responsible for the process simply. Still using soft skills, being kind, but when that was needed, reminding them of time, on rules that we all agreed so like a combination of, I would simply use this well-known saying like iron fist in the velvet glove, because that was really important to keep the whole process going on and to prevent it from falling apart completely. Then again, this socializing and coffee breaks helped, because we would talk separately with some important figures who represented the local self-government, and then continue the next day. This first seminar lasted for 3 days. So I mentioned some of this. I would also mention that local interpreters are very important, and the way they act and their own dignity and identity. How do each of us have been, because I was in that role also, interpret, is that a translation or interpretation? Because we had cases of both, and that could flip the process, you know, it's very sensitive. How would you interpret one statement from one side to the other in other local language, or in English to the international facilitators? What else? What did we did? We were appealing that we are trying to support them to create the new future for the local community, that some development projects were offered from the Norwegian side, like in line, but separate from us. We were not responsible for that. And all that helped actually to form the group eventually. But very different and much, much more difficult than educational sector, I have to say. We organized professional capacity building trainings also for ethnically mixed groups, and people were mistrustful in the beginning. They were sitting in their ethnic groups, but they didn't play enemies like almost the local authorities did. You know, after the first break, they started mixing, they were friendly to each other. Some of them knew each other from before, and they wanted to connect. It also helped that some of us were teachers by profession, so they connected. Even there we had, and even after several trainings, we had one case from the village school. I'm not saying that village schools are less informed, but they're simply closed. They are not as open-minded as these schools in the small town of Buenovac. They represent this when we asked for some examples of conflicts within the schools in order to try to resolve them jointly. They said, no, we don't have any conflicts. No, such behavior is not allowed in our schools, so our students behave. And then from the other side, they started joking, come on, don't tell us that you don't have like teasing in the classroom, like students quarreling over this. And oh yes, but then they started opening up and say, yeah, if you mean that, yes, we thought that you meant huge conflicts and so on. So that is example how group dynamics did it without actually facilitators had only to sit back a little bit and not be afraid of open space, and not be afraid even of the group being silent for some time, and let them do their own thing. Like I said, like group dynamics actually helped us here, and colleagues from that village school opened up, and from that point they fully participated in other activities. So some of the results as that we achieved, that we found actually not we, but because of the influence of non-citizen work, multi-ethnic local self-government was formed and was functional for some time, I have to say. Nowadays they are back to the old conflicts, unfortunately. School, I see that I have some mistakes, but I will correct that. School mediators clubs are operational in 2 secondary and 6 primary schools. And along this process, Serbian and Albanian students were cooperating and having trainings together, and some joint plays where they showed to the parents and to local authorities representatives actually what they did. So we have the audience from all these sectors following students in their process and following the work of school mediators clubs. As a conclusion, because we don't have I don't want to take too much time, that the most important conclusion is that multi-ethnic councils are needed in all parts of Serbia. As the communist tradition, we have ethnic councils. So each ethnic group still have their ethnic councils and they're operational, but they don't cooperate too much. So that's the main trouble. And that it is possible to find a way to resolve the problems within the local communities, but we have some of these spoilers that I mentioned, like power plays, different kinds of interests in different parts of the country still. Some pictures, as I said, socializing. So this is hiking. You can see the mixture of teachers from Serbia, from Serbian, Albanian schools, Norwegians also. Some of us locals. So that was one. Then students on 21st September, the International Peace Day, again, mixed group making some nice drawings. This is not too clear picture, but that is from municipality office. And we can talk about this table, John. So, and this is Norwegian embassy and Norwegian ambassador who was supporting the process, and our presentation for the big group, actually, again, of mixed, all important participants were there, from educational sector, from local self-government, from Bujanovac. They all came to Belgrade, to the Norwegian embassy, to present the results of projects, and several Norwegian colleagues. So that would be it from me. Sorry if I took a little bit more time, but I felt that I had to explain the whole process also.
Thank you, Tanya. That was very interesting and an excellent illustration. I want to just check, John, would you like to put any questions to Tanya first before we open up to questions?
Well, maybe just a couple of thoughts that I think reinforce kind of where we're going today. One of them is, you mentioned, Tanya, leaving your identity at the door. Very critical, and yet it's tough, right? How do you say leave your identity at the door and come in and join this process? Maybe this is more a rhetorical question. You can respond. The prep work you did with the government, seen as part of the multi-stakeholder process. I just want to reinforce, yes, yes, yes. It may take you 3 years to develop actually getting the stakeholders in the same room that you want to be in. And so I appreciate, Tanya, that you reinforced that there was a lot of work to do ahead of time to get those. One of the questions I came away with, did those stakeholders that you had to get permission, the government, did they end up as around the table, or were they just the gatekeepers that you needed in order to get the stakeholders together?
These were local self-government, so we actually they were both given permission and participating. So that is only local self-government in that small town of Bujanovac. In Belgrade, we were informing only Ministry of Education about educational programs. So we did not involve anyone from the political side because we were concentrated on that area.
Okay.
So they were participating, sorry, just take a little bit water. So they were at the table and they discussed also this local government, but also development projects, how they would do it together. They had separate talks also without us eventually after they passed it. But we had heard from them during these small meetings in municipality, as you saw. They were telling us that they learned a lot of skills that helped them negotiate with each other afterwards, that they learned in Lillehammer municipality how the work was organized there, and they applied at least some aspects there. Still, they were very dependent on Nansen facilitating these processes. I also have to say that. So even one of them said, why do we need to wait for Nansen to come? Why can't we do this ourselves? So that is the learning point. And about identity, I didn't say leave the identity outside. I wouldn't do that. Actually, I strongly believe that we should keep our own identities, but that should not be the obstacle to the dialogue. That's what we had in the beginning, that no one loses the identity, its own identity. Yeah, no participants give up her identity. So
okay.
we are what we are, but we acknowledge the identity of the others, and we don't do anything to harm each other. Or to undermine identity in any way, you know, just by saying you did this and that during the conflict, and your group maybe not you personally, but your group were attacking us, or your group was not giving us rights and so on. Okay, that happened, but it was not personally me or personally my colleagues. So let's try to accept me as a human being and see what we can do and work again together. That's what we did, especially with political representatives, because they were very angry and they were discussing this conflict much more than teachers. We used also conflict analysis tools for them for that purpose at later stage, so that helped clarify a little bit what happened in the past.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that there is yeah, you can't really leave your identity at the door, but you can kind of separate the group versus the individual there. Just two more observations. One is the importance of unofficial social events. Oh, critical for people just to break down and say, yeah, you're human like me, you care about your kids like I do, that kind of thing. I really appreciated your definition of authority in this case as the convener of the dialogue. You're the one responsible for the process, not in a, not for your own power aggrandizement, but for really the greater common good. And then just a rhetorical question. Too often we invest energy into these kinds of processes, and the conflict actors slip back into conflict after we're done. I'm just, what do we do differently? Are we doing something strategically wrong here? Is it the nature of the complexity of the conflict? So maybe that's a question just for the whole group as well. How do we make sure that the efforts we give add to the greater peace and are not just a blip in the conflict? So. Thanks.
Yeah, that is a very complex question, but I will quickly go back to the authority of facilitators. That was also because we observed different styles of facilitation, and after the wars in 90s, actually, the Balkan tradition, and at least that's my understanding. But with most of the groups that I work, they don't like to be patronized. And some facilitators that came from abroad did exactly that, like feeling sorry, empathy was used in completely different, completely wrong way, if I have to say, you know. And that's why we try to simply have a realistic approach that, okay, we are organizers and we want this process to continue, but we are not your teachers. We are not going to punish you in any way, but we will not allow chaos also. So that was clear from the start, you know, and reinforced during the process that some rules are there to be respected, and we are creating them together. Okay, let's revisit them and so on. With, as I said, these Caucasus talks with important figures, and because they could lead the group in completely opposite direction if we wouldn't do that, you know. And that's how we were continuing the process. And what are we doing wrong? Frankly, I don't know. I think that we talked over the years about that locals have to take more responsibility. That is in our case. Because when I compare Balkans with some other parts of the world, like Africa and Asia, I admired locals, how they picked up the process and continued. I think that we may have this dependence of the authority, whoever that is. Previously, it was the state in the communist times. And now these are some internationals that would come and solve our problems. We also have that high respect for authorities, whoever they are. These are some of the problems. What might be the solution? Some institutions, some new offices, as I said, multi-ethnic council or peace ministry, as I saw in some countries, or whatever we want to call it, that would really continue working in the same way civil society does. Is that possible? Because or in constant consultation with civil society, that's what I would say, not to be completely swollen up by the government structure. So I hope I at least partly answered.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think you did. I hope John thinks that too. I'm looking to see if there are questions, but I don't see any yet. I'm hoping for some from the audience. Certainly, I mean, you've brought out the complexity again, which was something that was very much made evident yesterday, and the need for continuity, the need for language, sensitivity to language and a shared language. I don't know if anyone has any questions around those. I think the question of slipping back into conflict it's something that, of course, it's what you're trying not to let happen, but it's an uphill battle. And
maybe participants can say if they have similar experience in their own part of the world or work they do.
I know in Kenya, Kevin, the County Governance Watch, you guys have really done some great work, you know, on these processes of coordination. Anything to add, Kevin?
Hey, John. Good afternoon, everybody. Especially 4 p.m. in Kenya.
We cannot hear you clearly, I'm sorry.
It's hard to hear you, Kevin. Could you speak a bit louder or get closer to the mic?
Oh, okay. So can you hear me now?
Better.
It's better?
Yes.
Yeah, so I do not have much to add to the ongoing presentation because I noted that this is basically a 3-day session, having started yesterday, ending tomorrow. But we're here because we engage with county governments, which are an equivalent of local governments here in Kenya. And the work that we do is basically to present platforms for discussions between citizens and their leaders. And we do that through different, of course, support mechanisms that have been presented to us by our constitution and various laws. And why we're here is because GPPAC supported the County Governance Watch in 2017 during our elections to be able to bring together a elected leaders and those who are applying for positions together with the citizens. And that was happening in areas that had been mapped as hotspot zones for the election that then took place. And
Kevin,
so,
I'm not sure how much anyone else can hear. It sort of comes and goes, the sound. John and Tanya, are you able to hear enough to respond?
Not really, actually.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to
Maybe.
interrupt you, Kevin. The bits I catch sound clearly really important.
Right.
Maybe you should write in the chat instead. It's very hard to hear you. I'm so sorry.
I think, yeah, now Kevin's completely dropped out. He was saying that they have some 3-day consultations or meetings.
Okay, fine.
That was clear, Kevin. Sorry. Now your mic is muted.
This is difficult. Let me see. Wait a minute. Here's something in the chat. He's going to come back after he's changed his devices. That's better, I think. Maybe someone else would like to bring an example. I feel so many different resonances in everything that I've heard. So I'm sure that those of you that live in complex conflicts must also have questions, examples you'd like to share. Maybe some of you have tried this. No? No, I was interested, Tanya, that you mentioned how easy it was to get the teachers to agree. Because I remember a long time ago when there was a peace process between Israelis and Palestinians, being there at a meeting between the Union of Palestinian Teachers and Israeli teachers. And it was one of the worst meetings I ever attended. People ended up absolutely furious and angry, and it must have been a classic case of how not to do things. I think they were worse off than before. And one of the reasons, I think, was that they had not had the preparation that you mentioned. I think the intra-group work is important. But that's, anyway, the situation is different because of the power imbalance. When you
Kevin is back with another device now.
Great.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Oh, it is much clearer.
Much better. Thank you.
Clear now?
Yes.
All right, yes. So I was saying that GPPAC supported County Governance Watch to be able to undertake some multi-stakeholder dialogue sessions during our 2017 general elections. And that's why we have found ourselves within the GPPAC network, for which we continue to be very grateful for the kind of capacity building that we receive through your emails, which come, I think, almost every week. And so I saw this happening and I thought, why not join and also share ideas with like-minded organizations and individuals. And so we are an organization that focuses on creating platforms and safe spaces for citizens to be able to engage with their leaders at the county levels. Kenya has 47 counties, having been broken by our constitution 2010, and 48 governments, with the national government at the apex level, and 47 county governments, which are otherwise called local governments in other jurisdictions. And so we are very keen to be able to ensure that citizen voices are heard by their leaders, and especially in conflict areas and areas that have been perennially marginalized by different regimes of government and even government programs. And that therefore refers to a number of northern Kenya and other parts of the country for which citizens may not be effectively heard when they're engaging with their leaders. And this is even much more serious because today there's a lot of talk around constitutional change, an upcoming referendum, particularly after the handshake between the former Prime Minister, Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, and the current President, His Excellency Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. And this is auspicious of what is called the Building Bridges Initiative, which is supposed to provide opportunities for citizens to be able to agree on 9 key agenda issues that have been that were identified by the two leaders as avenues of conflict and areas where people feel that they are not being either represented, included in government, and or spaces for engagement are limited. So as an organization, we are engaging with the less privileged or minority groups, special interest groups such as women, young people and persons with various disabilities to be able to engage the governments at the county levels to listen to these special interest groups, particularly by writing memoranda documents, writing letters of inquiry, and also writing petitions on issues which then people feel that they do not feel represented upon. And that has really gone on because especially concerning conflicts that are related to resources, so resource-based conflicts, for which we also realize that even the manner in which the county governments undertake their budgeting processes leaves quite a number of people out, whereas governance and leadership is supposed to ensure that no one is left behind. So we are happy to be part of this process, to listen to different experiences. Of course, we're also learning our lessons from what's happening in other jurisdictions. And I liked what Tanya, when I came in, Tanya was making her presentation. I liked a lot of what she's talking about because it's really similar to what we do here in Kenya, though from our end we call them the governors roundtables, because it's really a platform of engagement where you present the leader, the people ask their questions, and answers are given. And if the answers are not prompt and they cannot be given at that particular point in time, then we agree on a timeline or a time frame within which those responses will be given to. So we engage through different platforms, because the governance framework and the architecture of Kenya provides the citizens with various platforms to be able to participate. We have 6 laws that support our constitution, which include the Public Finance Management Act, the public participation laws. We have laws that deal with urban areas and cities. We have laws that cover issues to do with leadership and integrity. And so we aim towards giving citizens the opportunity to be able to use these laws to support the work which they do within their localities. And I'm sure that from the array of the people, the participants in the meetings, for which I also had Tanya talk about, like teachers within the education sector, government officials, private sector, is really almost similar to what we do here in Kenya, because peace is really something that cannot be achieved by one single arm of either government or institution or stakeholder group. So we also seek to bring together different stakeholders to have conversations around common interests. And we are happy for the little capacity that we receive from GPPAC through your emails. We read them actually, and sometimes we print the stories that come through your weekly newspapers, because through that, then we are sure that we are also learning from what other people are doing from their countries, and that we're able to use some of the tools that you share with us to empower the citizens to hold their leaders to account. I thank you so much. I didn't prepare to speak. I just wanted to listen, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very nice to hear. So thank you for giving example. It's good actually that you talked.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. That was really, really helpful and complimentary. And these platforms of engagement, it's a nice way of describing it. Thank you very much. And for your kind words about GPPAC. We're glad that it's useful that you read the news that comes. I think we're actually out of time. We're on the half hour now. So I'd like to thank all of you very much, participants, John, Tanya, the Christina behind the scenes, and I hope that tomorrow all the participants can join us again. We will have a case study from Fiji. John, I think which aspect of multi-stakeholder processes are you focusing on tomorrow?
I think I'm going to cover some of the considerations and principles that we have to understand about the whole context with which we're doing multi-stakeholder processes in. These come out of another multi-stakeholder process manual that's freely available, and I'll introduce that tomorrow as well, and just kind of cover those. And I think the example from Fiji will be another, give us another window into how these things are happening. And I too want to thank Kevin for his stepping forward and explaining. I know that the great work that they're doing there, and I'm very honored to be a part of GPPAC and a part of this global body that's making an impact. So thanks, Lucy, for facilitating today.
Thank you again, John, for the wonderful presentation, and Tanya, and Kevin at the end, thank you. And looking forward to being with you all tomorrow. And thank you, GPPAC, for letting us do this, for enabling it. Always proud to be part of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for your excellent facilitation as always, and for all support.
Thank you very much on behalf of
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you for your attention. See you tomorrow.